forum on behalf of Aviation Week.
Hello,
Hi,
there.
Graham.
Hi there. Can I just check that you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Good. We'll go then. I'll just share my screen if I can find the button down the bottom there. And share my screen. Share. There we go. So is that showing up?
It is, yes.
Good. Okay. So I'm Graham Warwick. I'm the executive editor for technology at Aviation Week. And thank you very much to the AAM Institute for inviting me to speak. So I spoke last year, and I'm glad to say that since last year, we can say we're making progress. We have manufacturers flying multiple airplanes. We have manufacturers, that's Joby up in the top left there. We have manufacturers flying their full-scale prototypes. That's Archer Midnight at the bottom there. We have SkyDrive appearing at the Osaka Expo. We have in the top right-hand corner, we have Beta doing the first piloted passenger carrying eCTOL flight into a major US airport, landing at JFK. And then down in the right corner, we have Vertical Aerospace in the UK doing its first airport-to-airport flight in the UK. That was to the Royal International Air Tattoo. So definite progress. We've had, as for certification, which is the single most critical thing in this industry, we've had the first electric engine certification by EASA with the Safran Ingenious. We've had the first electric aircraft specific propeller certification by Hartzell, and they did all their testing with Beta, and Beta will use that propeller in both versions of their Alia electric aircraft, the CTOL and the VTOL. That's the pusher propeller for cruise propulsion. We have multiple certification basis agreements signed, G1s as they call them in the US. That's for eCTOL aircraft in the case of Beta. It's eVTOL aircraft in the case of Joby, Archer, etc. And engines, and there's multiple engines. There's not only Safran, there is Magni-X. Beta has an engine in certification. Zeravia has an engine in certification in the US. So there's multiple, and the sort of rule of thumb is if you get to a G1, generally, assuming you still have the money, you make it to certification. Now, there is the caveat, there are no conforming aircraft flying yet, except possibly Volocopter. We're not entirely sure where they are. We'll get to that in a minute, but we are very close. We have aircraft running pre-production aircraft coming off of production lines, and we're getting closer and closer to those aircraft being conforming. So then they can start the 4-credit certification testing, and the clock starts ticking towards type certification. Regulation, a lot of progress there. The big ones in the US was that President Trump signed a series of executive orders. That was one of them related to getting the rules for BVLOS drones, the Part 108 rules for BVLOS drones out and into the industry. Much delayed, but he put a time limit on that. And he also, his executive order also said that there will be some AAM pilot projects, probably going to start in 2027. That might include the AAM flights at Los Angeles Olympic, could probably fall into that pilot project group. The FAA finally released its Mosaic rule. That's a complete rewrite of the light sport aircraft rules. It's a fundamental rewrite of a very important rule. It basically means you can now have electric propulsion in a light sport aircraft, and you can use that aircraft for flight training and all the good things. It also allows personal and recreational eVTOL aircraft, which of course we all know is a very vibrant sector of eVTOL at the moment, with a lot of people flying those single-seat recreational eVTOLs. the FAA has literally just released an advisory circular, which actually simplifies the path to a G1 certification basis. Up until now, you've had to go and do that individually, call up special conditions and all that sort of thing. This actually sets out how a manufacturer could, if you follow the advisory circular, you get to a G1 theoretically more quickly. Outside the US, the EASA quite recently issued its Part IAM, as they call it, innovative air mobility rather than advanced air mobility. And they also revised a bunch of other parts related to aircraft operations to bring eVTOLs into, or VCA as they call them, VTOL capable aircraft, into the rulemaking, so that kind of helps pave the way. There was an agreement, what they call the Alliance on eVTOL Certification. 5 nations, US, UK, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, agreed to work together to try and close the gaps that still remain, particularly between the US and European approach to eVTOL certification. EASA was not part of that, but the UK is using EASA rules, so it's looking for a way to close that gap. The United Arab Emirates, GCAA, issued a framework for hybrid sort of eVTOL helicopter operations. That really paves the way for them to begin commercial operations at some point. We'll talk about that later. And in Asia Pacific, a bunch of nations, a large number of nations, agreed reference materials to help regulators move forward with certification of eVTOL. So quite a lot of activity. I'm going to call out China separately because it's really on its own completely separate path to everybody else. We already have the first certified eVTOL type certification, production certification, and the airworthiness certification for commercial operations. That's already done. It's the EHang 216S. That's under 600 kilograms. It's also autonomous, 2 passengers, no pilot. That is actually in operational trials now, doing aerial tourism flights, which are very constrained and repeatable and not terribly complex operations, but a good place to start. Autoflight has just received its final of the 3 certification for the V2000CG, which is its autonomous cargo eVTOL. That's the first eVTOL above 1,000 kilograms to be certified. It's actually about 2,000 kilograms, maybe a bit more. So that's quite a big vehicle. That's the size of an air taxi that's certified, but it's currently just cargo. There are multiple full-scale prototypes flying in China. It's almost impossible to keep track of how many. There's more than a dozen, probably 15, maybe more, companies that are flying, uncrewed most of the time, full-scale vehicles, demonstrators, or early prototypes. And there are multiple certification programs that have been accepted by the Chinese regulator, the CAAC, and are underway. And we're expecting the first passenger eVTOL certifications possibly in 2026. So that's they're moving very quickly with a lot of high-level government support. Another big shift in the last year has been quite a heavy shift towards defense as a potentially an early revenue source. One of the things we've seen in the past year is these companies that are facing longer times to get to service than they maybe hope for are looking for early revenue sources. So some of the companies, for example, are looking to sell components that they already produce. Beta wants to sell its engines to other people, for example. Zeravia is selling engines and fuel cells to other people for early revenue, but also the other one is defense. And so Archer has teamed with Anduril, which is a fast-growing defense startup in the US, and they're developing an autonomous and attritable hybrid electric VTOL based on the Midnight Air taxi. We haven't seen it yet, but it's on its way. Joby has always had a bit of a focus on defense. It's delivered aircraft to the US Air Force for testing, but it's also, it's looking at the likely requirements and is focusing on its ability to do hybrid, the hydrogen electric, uncrewed and crewed aircraft, longer ranges than just pure battery. They acquired the fuel cell company H2Fly and the autonomy company X-Wing, so they're well positioned for that. And then there's a host of others that are moved to defense. Electra is looking at UltraStall for special operations, contested logistics, doing a bunch of small SBIR, small business contracts with Marines Army, Air Force to look at how that aircraft could be used. Regent has just formed a defense division to offer its electric sea gliders, which are basically wing and ground effect craft, which it's developing for the commercial market for overwater regional routes. It's looking at how it might be able to take various versions of that capability and apply it to the defense market. So there's a lot of activity around defense. No procurement programs really yet, but a lot of interest. Inevitably, we all know that there have been casualties. The biggest one, obviously, is Lilium, which went into insolvency twice after a rescue deal failed. So Lilium is pretty much off the board. Volocopter filed for insolvency, but was acquired by China's Wanfeng Group, which is an automotive manufacturer supplier that also owns Diamond Aircraft, one of the major general aviation companies. And Diamond is now working with Volocopter. Oh, sorry, I apologize for that. And then a bunch of others, some of which we probably are not that familiar with. APUS is a German fuel cell hydrogen aircraft developer. Custom Cells, that was Lilium's battery supplier, doing those very high power batteries that Lilium needed. Aviation, electric aircraft, it's paused its activity. Overair we haven't heard from Overair for quite a while. Rolls exited the electric business after having acquired Siemens and spent a lot of time developing electric. They decided the market wasn't ready. And we know about Universal Hydrogen, was going to do hydrogen electric regional aircraft. They ran out of funding and they closed. And there are a bunch of others that have also stumbled, or some have paused, some have disappeared. There's also been a shift for a lot of manufacturers to go to cargo unmanned aircraft first. One of our previous speakers mentioned Jaunt in Canada. Their drone, obviously Jaunt has been trying to get its slowed rotor compound air taxi off the ground for quite a while. It's decided to go first with a subscale uncrewed cargo vehicle, and there's a bunch of others doing the same. Dufour, Odis, which is operating, I think, in Oman, and Hopflight and others that have decided that they were already developing a subscale aircraft for development testing, and they're just looking at that as the basis of a cargo, uncrewed cargo initial product to bring money in the door. So again, we referred to this last year, a widening gap between the leaders and the followers. Joby is well out ahead of everybody else. It has raised overall, somewhere around about $3 billion, as multiple aircraft flying that have come off its pilot production line in California. It has done piloted transitions and is using both piloted and uncrewed flying to continue development. It's begun piloted flight tests in Dubai, ready for its operations there over the coming months and into 2026. And it has flown hydrogen electric, fuel cell powered hydrogen electric, both a version of its eVTOL air taxi, and we've now seen pictures of a dedicated eCTOL fuel cell uncrewed aircraft. So they're moving very fast. The Archer is, sorry, Acre, it says Archer, is not far behind. Certainly it's raised about the same, somewhere about 2.8 something billion total billion since it started. It is now finally flying its pre-production Midnight piloted flights. Its first flight was conventional takeoff and landing, wingborne. It hasn't, the piloted Midnight hasn't begun VTOL flying yet. They have not, across their both uncrewed early prototype and the piloted aircraft, they've not done a full transition yet. They've kept all the rotors turning while they were going through the transition to wingborne flight. They will have to do that with the aircraft they're flying now at some point, go to full transition. They have begun flight tests in Dubai. Sorry, it was Abu Dhabi. I apologize, that's my mistake, in Abu Dhabi. But it's with their uncrewed first aircraft, the demonstrator, rather than the piloted aircraft. Beta has done multiple demonstrations with its piloted eCTOL Alia, notably the flight into JFK, but the aircraft has done a tour of the UK and Europe. is heading to Norway for an operational cargo demonstration with Bristow, and there are other demonstrations planned in Dubai with UPS, in the UK, in the US with United Therapeutics, all in the piloted cargo initial role, and mainly that's the main focus initially. And they have actually they were the first to do piloted transitions with their eVTOL aircraft with a demonstrator, and the first of the pre-production eVTOL aircraft should be coming off their line fairly soon. So, and then you go into the followers. Volocopter, as I say, went insolvent, then was acquired by Wanfeng. Diamond to become part of Diamond. In effect, Diamond's now helping Volocopter with certification. They're aiming for 2026 with the Volocity, the two-seat piloted two-seat airplane. They admit that they don't know if they'll be able to do that, but that's their target. So they're back up and running again, which is good. Eve in Brazil is testing its uncrewed, full-scale uncrewed demonstrator. It hasn't flown yet, but they're still targeting sort of EAS and entry into service about 2027. So they're in the second wave. Vertical Aerospace in the UK has done piloted thrust-borne vertical flight and wing-borne horizontal flights with their second prototype. They have not joined the two together and done transitions flights yet. That's ahead, and they're now targeting an entry into service of 2028 to give them time to get there at a sort of a reasonable pace without a huge cash burn. That's the idea anyway. And Wisk, which is the Boeing subsidiary that's doing a fully autonomous aircraft, that's targeting to fly its prototype this year. They're still not saying when they'll certify and enter service, but they're still aiming for, before 2030. So I'm galloping along here. Funding quickly. Money's continued to come in. It's very tight. It's really, really tight across electric aviation, across advanced air mobility. Funding is very hard to find. Companies, investors are looking for companies that have got a path to revenue in the near term, and very few of these companies have paths to revenue in the near term. But we've seen Joby get a commitment from 500 million from Toyota, which is the single largest investor anyway, and that first 250 million of that is in place. Archer raised 300 million when it launched its defense business on the back of the agreement with Anduril. And it then did a public offering, because it's a publicly listed company. It then did a public offering that raised another 850 million. So it's around that, say, 2.8 billion total raised. Vertical, whole other, you see a very different level of funding when you get out of those two leaders. Vertical raised 60 million, gives it another year's runway. And that's kind of how it's going to go with Vertical. I think they're going to try and raise the money to just keep moving along at the pace that they've set themselves, aiming for 2028. SkyDrive, they were one of our earlier speakers talked about SkyDrive. They did a fairly significant Series D earlier on. So the money is still coming in, but on a much reduced rate, unless you are the Jobys and the Archers of this world. So what's next? You can see here, Beta is on track to get its eCTOL certified in 2026. It wants to follow with the eVTOL a year later. It's going to use this new FAA advisory circular to get to a G1 for the eVTOL. It hasn't got one yet, but it wants to accelerate that process. Volocopter, as we say, is aiming for 2026. We'll see how it does. Joby and Archer, they don't talk about certification anymore. They talk about entry into service, but we think they're looking at the pace. They haven't flown conforming aircraft, so we're looking at, we think, late 26. Sergio Secuta, if you know him of S&G Consulting, thinks it may be a bit later than that, 2027. China, looking at 2026. There's a very strong possibility China could certify a passenger eVTOL before anybody else. And then entry into service. We heard earlier one of our speakers talk about the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi. We're just finishing up here. There's great uncertainty and confusion about when and how they'll enter service in the UAE. The timelines have them entering service before they've certified the aircraft in the US. None of us in the that watch the industry think that's possible, but they could begin market survey flights. They could get a permit to fly some sort of service, but But we don't know, but they are still talking about 2026 with some sort of regulatory support to be able to begin flying. US is now looking like 2027 for early service, 2028 before we get sort of any sort of volume of service. And of course, that gets us into the LA games for launching AAM. So that's it, folks. A quick gallop through my view of advanced air mobility. And that's how you can reach out to me if you want to continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Graham. It was really good to get this update from you. I think it's very realistic, dates and things like that, and also a good overview of where we're going. And I think for those that were in the past getting quite frustrated that things were moving so slowly, I think we're starting to see momentum building.
Yeah, and I think we have to give the regulators due for moving with sort of unusual pace to get things in place and not be the ones holding this up. Certification is a long and laborious process, even when we know how to develop the airplanes, and we've done it for decades. When you're developing a new aircraft with new regulations, there are obviously other barriers, but the regulators have done a lot to pave the way, and it's really now down to the industry to do the work, to get the test data, to get the aircraft flying, to get this done. And as you say, if you get to a G1, if you have the money, by and largely you get to certification. So I think we're into that certainty of certification. There may still be some timing issues, but we're definitely on the way.
Oh, thank you, Graham, and thank you everybody for this first half. We're going to take a short 15-minute recess, so we should be back at, well, let's go back to GMT now. I'm working in GMT +2. So